Zoom Files. The Zoom Files. Well, hello, friends. Mike Falkenstein here with 1-8 Catalyst, here with another episode of the Zoom Files, and I'm so thankful that you're with us. As you know, with the Zoom Files, we're just trying to introduce people to opportunities to be involved in ministry. And I have today Brian Gilson, who serves with a ministry called P28 Global in Oklahoma. And Brian, I'm so glad that you're with us here on the Zoom Files.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Mike. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, you bet. I'm so thankful to have gotten to know you. And as we've been talking, I've had a longstanding heart for international student ministry, which is what you're doing there at Oklahoma State. So give people a quick idea of what you guys do there with your ministry.
Well, we're here at Oklahoma State University, and we also have some outreaches at some neighboring universities, such as University of Oklahoma and the University of Tulsa. We have over 1,300 international students just here at Oklahoma State.
Wow.
From 95 different countries represented. And that number is actually very low. We normally have quite a few more, but because of COVID-19, the numbers have dropped significantly. We oftentimes are closer to 2,000. And, these kids, they come from all over the world. They've left their homes and their families and their friends and their support networks. And we get the privileges of being that support network for them, and to invite them into their home and feed them and to have fun with them and play games with them, and to be there to rejoice with them when they do well on a test, and to be there to weep with them when, they get bad news of a lost loved one at home, for example. So, we just try to spend time with them, but we're also always very gospel forward. We have weekly Bible studies where we are introducing the gospel to non-believers. It's primarily for non-believers. And we have a meal, we have games, and we have a good time, but we always, the gospel is always front and center in everything that we do, either by demonstration or by proclamation.
That's awesome. That's great. And so you've already kind of detailed the strategic opportunity, right, with international student ministry. But I'll just sort of, help us sort of recap that. So the real strategic opportunity, of course, is that in our colleges and universities, international students are coming. Many of those students are the top students from their home country. Now they're here. And so really it's sort of like the world has come to our doorstep, right? And so you don't have to go to a Muslim dedicated area or Muslim area to reach the gospel necessarily. They're coming here. And hopefully if they do come to know Christ, they then would be able to take the gospel back to their home country. So Brian, before we I was going to ask you to sort of give sort of a top 3 answer. But before we do that, give folks a quick idea of, from your perspective, that strategic opportunity, right? So again, if you have a college of any kind in your hometown, for those watching, there is an opportunity, right, to reach these international students.
Absolutely. Your women's ministry, your men's ministry, your home Bible study group, you probably do not have the capability of sending a covert team into Iran, for example. But guess what? You can have an influence in Iran. Just at your local university, there are Iranian students who are open to the gospel. You can have an influence in Saudi Arabia. You can have an influence in China. We can have influence for the gospel and for the kingdom all over the world, just by engaging with these students in a very simple way, just by simply loving on these students and being his hands and feet right here in your local university town.
Isn't that great? That is so great. And so, yes, that could be individuals doing that, but that could be become a really cool ministry for a church, couldn't it? Particularly, if your church is, within any distance of a college, there's could be a church-wide deal. And you mentioned it, Brian, but having them in your home, that's really where that starts, right? I know a lot of international students are just dying to sort of learn. I mean, they're coming to America to study, and they're wanting to learn about Americans. And so, in other words, you have a captive audience there. So, is that what you found? I mean, as you're playing these games and having them in your home, that's kind of the first steps to building the bridge for the gospel, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there are, a lot of people have concerns about cultural competencies. They're concerned about saying the wrong thing or serving the wrong food or not knowing the cultural etiquettes and rules. There is something to be said for that. We do need to learn those cultural competencies, and they're important. But when you care for somebody, when you're genuine, and a lot can be forgiven. And honestly, I think those cultural competencies are much less important than simply having a genuine care for people, inviting them into your home. We have had examples where we have tried to cook something national for somebody and totally ruined the dish. But I think they just loved they could tell that we cared about them and went to a lot of effort to try to make them feel comfortable and make them feel loved.
That's right. That's right. And that is so true, both with food and language. And, Brian, a lot of my history in ministry is in China in particular. And so I'm one of these guys. I actually did some language study, and it is interesting when, I was just starting that out. You just learn how to say hello and goodbye and, how are you? And just some simple things. And it's fun how the Chinese are like, oh, your Chinese is so good. It's like, I know 3 words or something, but to them, it just means a lot. And that really is the first steps towards, maybe you could say a bridge strong enough to carry the weight of the gospel right through that friendship. So I'm interested then, Brian, to hear from you about sort of for those watching, hopefully we have a number of church leaders watching. If you were to say, okay, these are really the top 3 reasons why maybe either every Western Christian or every Western church should be involved in doing international student ministry in their hometown, what would kind of your top 3 things be there?
Well, Mike, I think the first one is simply that we're commanded to do this. And now I know some of your Bible scholars are probably going to say, wait a minute, show me where in the Bible it says thou shalt do international student ministry.
Right.
But it actually does. It's part of the Father's heart revealed in the law through Moses, that there are 3 groups that are kind of privileged, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And the Father's heart is really for these groups that are vulnerable. And we see that the stranger in your midst, and another term that's often used is the foreigner in your midst. This is a person who doesn't have that support network and is very vulnerable. And in fact, there's even a point where Israel is chastised very severely through the prophet Ezekiel for not caring for the foreigner in their midst. So yeah, this is something that we are commanded to do, to take care of those foreigners and those who are vulnerable in our population. And in case anybody says, well, that's all in the Old Testament. I mean, what does Jesus tell us in Matthew 25? He says, I was a stranger and you didn't take me in. I was naked and you didn't clothe me, sick and in prison and you didn't visit me. And you remember what he said to that group, Mike? He said, depart from me. So certainly I think that's the first thing, is that we're commanded to do this. And you've already kind of brought this up a little bit, but those of us who have traveled and maybe don't know the language very well and maybe don't have a great support network in country, we know what it is to be vulnerable, and we know what it is to need those people in our lives that can help direct us to deal with bureaucratic issues or healthcare issues or those sorts of things that seem very minor until you're in a foreign country. And, I once had a migraine, and the little bit of language that I had just left me with this migraine. And I'm trying to explain to this girl with very little language what I needed. And she was so helpful to me and just walked me through the symptoms and helped me get the medicine that I needed for my migraine. But those things that seem so very simple are very, very challenging when you're in a foreign environment. So yeah, I think we very much have a need to take care of those people. That's right.
That's right. I'm really thankful that you mentioned that, because you are right. Maybe in 2 ways. One, the if you've experienced that yourself in a foreign country, you understand
Right.
what that really means. And certainly then that does at least maybe break down some walls for the gospel. But then secondly, if you have a church that has, churches are full of all kinds of people with different experiences. And so to even offer, driving lessons to the international student, or maybe who has never driven in their own country, but then they go, man, in America, I'm going to need to have a car, or a car repair, or, taking, students to the health office when they first get there, and the housing office, and how all that works. And things that we take for granted that we know how it works in our country, they may not know, right? So that is really important, and a really good first step. So that's great. So what's your second reason, Brian?
Well, we've actually already touched on this a little bit too, but it is a strategically important missions field in a big way. And I think we've already discussed how that is, but I could share a few quick stories that will demonstrate that. There's a young lady I know who came from India as first year of her bachelor's degree. I believe she was 18. Not a believer, although her mother was a believer, and she'd had some seeds in her life, and really had no sort of network or friends here. And a local church connected with her, and some of the women in the church really connected with her. She became a believer. She really matured very quickly in a short amount of time in that 4 years that she was here. She graduated. Well, I guess she was here longer. She wound up doing a master's degree, but ultimately she just really developed a heart for ministry. That even though she had opportunities to stay in the U.S. and to work here, she felt the Lord was calling her back home. And she's in the process of developing outreach, women's outreach there in her hometown in India. There's just one example of the strategic nature of being able to reach out, across the world in a very easy way. Another young man from Iran who actually came to the Lord through our ministry several years ago. We've been discipling him for several years, and he is now involved in translating audio resources that he sends back to his family and friends and into Iran.
Wow.
So we're able to really have that impact and that reach into Tehran, of all places. There's another friend of ours who is from China and came here as an international student many years ago. He's about my age, but came as an international student, got involved with the ministry of Bridges International. Ultimately became a believer, gave his heart to the Lord, and he is now successful in business, but he opens his home and supports international student ministry in a very, very big way, very involved in reaching out to the Chinese students here in Stillwater as well. So he's a huge resource, and the Lord is really bearing fruit through that man. One final one, a young man from Saudi Arabia who came to the Lord through our ministry, discipled for a few years and eventually returned home. And has been very open with his faith and is sowing seeds. And he's encountered intense resistance, but we're just trusting that the Lord is going to uphold him and cause those seeds to bear fruit. So this is an impact, and this is why we call our ministry P28 Global Ministries. Even though we're a local outfit here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, we believe we have a global call, and that through this strategic missions field, we can also have a global impact.
That's awesome. That's great. And then your final reason that all Christians and churches should be involved?
Man, because it's a lot of fun working with these kids. It really is. Most of these kids are just so open, and like you said, they are so interested in learning about American culture, and they become it makes them feel so good when we're interested in learning about their culture. This is one area that my wife really shines. With a lot of these girls, they'll talk about different national dishes, and she'll let the girls teach them how to cook one of their dishes, for example. They'll do girls' nights where a lot of the Muslim girls will come over to the house, and I'll leave for the night. I'll have to go stay at a friend's house, but that way they can remove their hijab, and they'll do makeup, and they just have a lot of fun. So it is just a blast working with these kids. It is truly a privilege, Mike.
That's great. So in some ways, your interaction with them is blessing you too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, hopefully you're blessing them, but it's a blessing to you as well. That's great. Well, good. So I hope for those watching, you're seeing that this can be a real strategic opportunity. Brian, I'm wondering if there are people that are interested in learning more either about your ministry specifically or how to get involved with international student ministry. What are the best ways that they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. And we would love to work with anybody. If your church, your home Bible study group, you as an individual, if you would like to get involved and like to know how to get involved, please reach out to us. Probably the best way would just be through our website. We have a contact page, and that website is simply p28global.com. And there's a lot of resources on our website as well. But beyond that, another way that we really recommend to people to get involved is through partnerships. Whatever denomination you're a part of, there may be some endeavors already in place. For example, the BCM usually has some sort of international outreach. Chi Alpha usually has some sort of international outreach. And your denomination may already have resources. And that would be a really good first step, is to get involved and ask them how you can help. If not, one organization that I highly recommend is Bridges International. They are the international outreach arm of Cru, and they do wonderful work and do a great job just all over the country of reaching out to international students and getting people plugged in. So just don't forget that one vital phrase: how can I help?
That's great. Well, thanks, Brian. And I would encourage all of the listeners and viewers to get in touch with Brian. I know a bit about Bridges International as well. They're a good ministry. And this is, again, something that you could be doing in your own hometown. And so, Brian, thank you so much for being with us. And we sure appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
The Zoom Files.